In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome back to another Integrated Interventions podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Dundas. I'm the Director of Education. And joining us today is Clinical Director Joshua Westby, as well as Program Therapist Lauryn Maldonado. I'd like to thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Today's podcast topic centers around the idea of traditional residential models. And I wanted to talk about what we have here in Texas, which is our rock garden location. Can you tell me more about that and how that is different than maybe traditional models that exist out in this world?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So integrated leadership for the last year has really been looking at how we can answer this question of providing a more traditional level of care that you would think of in an adolescent type facility that still leads to that level of independence that comes with the integrated program overall. And we feel like we've come up with a really good program that helps to bridge that gap between the traditional residential model that's going to come with a milieu and it's going to come with very structure and order, that has steps and progressions that move it towards that level of independence integrated is known for, launching students into successful, sustainable, independent living.
Can you talk about the concept of a milieu and what that means for someone that might be watching the podcast for the first time and they're not familiar with that term? Can you define what that means?
Yeah, so the milieu, or the social structure that we build within a program, is really a selling point for most programs, right? When we think about traditional adolescent programs, a milieu is something that has the ability to change through social integration, right? I watch somebody else do something and get in trouble, so I learn not to do something to get in trouble. And the milieu is really the backbone of the program. Integrated doesn't work that way. We haven't wanted the milieu setting because we're trying to get students ready to live out in the world, and they're not going to have that same level of structure with people that are in the program that are going through similar experiences, right? Because they're going to have bosses and friends and coworkers and education that's going to operate outside of what we would think of as a traditional milieu. At our rock garden location, as we look at our traditional level of care, we're building out a milieu where we can have that structure and that connection piece where people can interact with each other and lean on each other and grow and learn and utilize group therapy and things like that, but also have the opportunity to go out into the community and start to build social structures for themselves that aren't therapeutically based the same way.
Lauryn, what are those elements that make up the milieu is one part of that community? What are the other elements that come together to form this level of care?
Some of the things that we're really excited about sharing are things such as group therapy in the home, individual therapy, which we can also do in the home, abilities to go on community outings. We're really excited to share group meal times. We're able to implement training and teaching our students how to cook and how to use different objects throughout the kitchen, the oven, the stove, what's too high, let's not light that on fire, please, and be able to really teach them this life skill that they can take with them.
Yeah, mealtimes are one of my favorite parts of the more traditional style of programming. Cooking meals with students is a really fun experience, and we can learn using that milieu again to build out I'm cooking a meal with the student for the entire house. So the two of us are doing something that betters the group. So we're learning some of that basic skill as well. That's going to mirror to real life when I make dinner for friends or I have a family and I need to cook for them. On top of the fact that they're nutritious meals with a balanced diet where it's all pre-planned. So we don't have to spend a lot of time focusing on food versus the other areas where we have deficits when a student comes into the program, so that we can focus on that area, knowing that as they move down the process, they're going to learn more about what the independent part of meal planning looks like as well.
And we also have a nutritionist that has helped us out with designing the menu.
Yeah, so we have an awesome nutritionist that's designed an entire year's worth of meal planning so that we can take those recipes, teach them to students, also teach what a balanced meal looks like, what nutrition looks like, and how they can utilize those recipes and skills when they transfer down the line into a more independent level of care.
How does custom fit programming apply to this? Because normally in this setting, with a group setting, it's like if the group does this, so does everybody else. Everybody's doing everything at the same time, but that's not the case here. So can you talk about custom fit programming and how that finds its way into this setting?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. So this was the hardest part for Integrated to come up with a solution for. And it took a lot of time for us to come up with a plan that's going to work sustainably over the course of the program. So what we call that is parallel programming. And what that is we're matching the residential level of care that we traditionally understand with the ability to custom fit programming to meet the needs of a specific student. So with parallel programming, there's specific things in the schedule that are going to be the same week over week. And then there's big areas where students can plug in things that are specific to them. So if there is an equine therapy group and this student doesn't enjoy horses and would much rather be at work, then they don't need to go to the equine therapy group. They're going to be at work. Versus Tuesday, when we have an emotional processing group that they would want to be at, where they can be there instead of working on a chore or a work assignment, something else that could also be part of a schedule. So it helps to combine those pieces so that we're working a model and a rigid structure, but also we're leaving room for students to make it their own and really work towards what they need and what's going to make them successful in the long run.
Lauren, I had a question to you about the idea of point systems, punitive and non-punitive. Can you talk about what the punitive point system looks like and why we decided to do something opposite of that by going with a non-punitive point system?
So, in a traditional residential setting, what we were seeing was a lot of leveling up systems and then leveling down systems. So, when students would come into those sorts of programs, what they were faced with was either I do everything that you say in the exact order that you say it, or else. And oftentimes there's a fluctuation. Sometimes we'll have a great period at the beginning of coming into a new program or setting. And then we start to backslide, which is true in real life as well. So something that we wanted to do differently was we didn't want to force them to not have bad days and to not be able to have self-actualization and be able to make those decisions because they failed yesterday. And that's really how they would see it. So what we decided to do was go in and give them something that they could look at as goals, and these can be individualized. Not every point card or non-punitive point system is going to look the same, but to give them that opportunity to say, hey, these were the things that you talked to me about that you said you were really interested in working on, and yeah, you stayed in bed all day yesterday. So obviously we didn't meet those goals and expectations that we had set for ourselves. However, we get to get up and we get to try again today. And that's okay.
Yeah, I look at it like if you are an employee at a job, if you have a special assignment that you're supposed to do and you don't do that well on that assignment, but you get the rest of your job function done, does that mean that you're a bad employee? And in typical jobs, you don't get promoted and demoted over and over again over the course of your career. We don't want students to start thinking that that's how the real world works either, because it's not. So we want students to understand that, yeah, you made a bad decision in this one area of your life, but overall, the rest of your day was actually pretty good. And if we can focus on this negative decision tomorrow, we can focus on that one because we know the rest of it's okay. And then we'll see what tomorrow brings. But it's always working towards solution instead of being punitive and saying you did one bad thing, thus you're a bad person, because that's just not true to life.
It provides people the opportunity to be able to, to be themselves too, and understanding that, things aren't always going to go my way, but here are some positives. And that's one thing I want to really talk about is when it comes to that structure of that kind of level up structure, usually people are focusing on all the things that I did wrong versus, the fact that I did some things right. How does this structure lend to that of being able to focus on the positives, but also referencing the fact that, yeah, maybe this didn't go the way I wanted it to, but yet there's some positive things happening?
Yeah, think about it in the terms of like an oppositional defiance diagnosis, right? In a traditional milieu setting or a traditional residential care setting, in a traditional residential care setting, the idea that these are the rules and this is the structure and you have to abide by it doesn't mesh well with students who are oppositionally defiant. They're going to push back on that because it's there. In a non-punitive system like ours, you can push back. You waste an entire day of your life by sitting in bed and doing nothing. Okay, tomorrow, are we going to wake up and decide to be active and engage and do what we need to do? Whether you stay in bed today does not affect your ability to be productive tomorrow. We don't want students to think that, oh, I just need to push back because pushing back is fun or because it gains me something. We really want students to understand, and I think we've built a program that's going to do a really good job at that, of helping students to realize that when you waste your time, that's what you're wasting. And the energy that you put into the program is going to come back to you in progress and success.
Well, and then they don't have to be concerned of like holding up the group, for example, because I've seen in those settings before where one person is having a tough time, which delays the group from doing something else or some maybe specific part of the scheduling process. One of the exciting aspects, I believe, of this system, as we talk about, is parallel programming. And I know that's something that Joshua was very passionate about and something I know that you also love to talk about. So I wanted to get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of parallel programming for those who maybe aren't familiar with the term.
So parallel programming is looking at programming in such a way that the girls can get together and do things as a group and have expectations as a group for meal times, for group therapy, for certain outings that are planned. And then it also gives them this awesome ability to say, you know what? I don't want to be a part of that, and to be able to come to me or come to the coordinator individually and process that and discuss what they would like to do instead and their reasoning why. It gives them this ability to really be autonomous and say, you know what, previously I didn't get to take a lot of the reins in my programming and what I wanted to do, but I see how this could benefit me, and what we're doing as a group on this specific day or individually on this specific day doesn't benefit me. Let me tell you why. I've had a student recently come to me and say that, and it was the coolest thing for her to say, you know what, Lauryn, for whatever reason on this specific day, I just don't think this is going to work for me. Is that okay? And I looked at her and said, is that okay? You tell me. Can you explain to me why you don't want to participate in this and what you would like to do instead? And she said, heck yes, I can. And she just gave me all her reasoning. And I said, well, that sounds like a really great idea. I don't see a problem with it. She looked at me like I had smacked her in the face. She was just absolutely stunned by the fact that she could make this decision on her own, present it to me, and that I was in agreement. We don't see that in traditional residential settings a lot of the time.
So in a sense, they're cultivating accountability in this process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to be one of the coolest things, I think. As for me as an educator, I love those light bulb moments where you're working with someone and they may have struggled with something, and repeatedly they weren't able maybe to get the concept. And all of a sudden when it clicks, you're like, okay, this is awesome. This is what I love to do. That sounds like a light bulb moment.
Yeah, and it mirrors real life, right? Short of prison, where they tell you, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. In real life, nobody follows you around and holds you to a schedule or expectation. You have to do that internally. And by helping our students to start to understand that for the first time in their lives here, it gives them the opportunity to learn the importance of being self-accountable so that they can gain those tools and move forward. It's awesome.
So Lauryn, what does a regular student schedule look like?
So a generalized schedule for one of our students would look like waking up in the morning, getting breakfast, whether that's making it together, moving forward, getting meds. Also, in this time gap, we have space for individualized sessions. Our groups tend to happen between 10:30 and 12 o'clock. After group therapy, they would move forward with lunch. After lunch, the students have an opportunity to do more individualized programming. That could look like education. It could look like going to the river, going to the library, applying for jobs if that's something that they're working on, as well as doing individual sessions with me if afternoons are something that they prefer over morning sessions. I know I do. And then we move forward into dinner time, which is done in a group setting where everybody is allowed to participate, help make food, ask questions. They're assisted by mentors and sometimes the coordinators as well in making decisions about how to put a meal together and then how to successfully sit down and navigate a mealtime with a whole bunch of peers before cleaning up and making sure that everything is put away for the next day. That's when they start getting ready for bed, hygiene, things of that nature.
This is also a really cool place where we see the mentoring model that's in our transitional program meeting this residential level of care. Because throughout the day, some of these tasks are done in a group setting. Some of them are done with the student without a mentor at all. And then one-on-one mentoring still takes place in areas here. So if a student's afternoon job is to mow the lawn, they can be side by side a mentor working on that task, learning hand over hand with somebody in an individualized setting, specifically designed so the student can learn from somebody that they look at as a peer.
There's a lot of opportunities for modeling to happen in a variety of ways.
Yeah, it's way different than when you look at some of the RTCs that our students are going to come to us from, where they don't get any amount of individualized one-on-one care. They're part of one of 5 or one of 7 that are staffed with one person. Here, we get the opportunity to have that milieu as well as the one-on-one intervention piece so that our students are engaged in the process and still have that relationship piece, which is so key to how integrated works.
Joshua, can you talk more about the therapeutic part of the program and what that looks like in this setting?
Yeah, so when we look at the clinical backbone of our program, one of the cool things about this level of care is that we can adapt the therapeutic process to meet the students wherever they're at. So let's say we have a situation in the milieu where everybody is infighting and they're just all mad at each other. Cool. We can do a processing group around that in real time, come together on our Monday group and talk about what we're feeling. If one student is struggling with a specific interpersonal skill, and they want to talk about that in the group setting, the group that was planned that we were going to talk about something has now become this conversation in interpersonal relationships where we can utilize one person's struggle to help teach the group, right? And that's the same for the therapeutic interventions that Lauryn uses in the home with the students on the day-to-day basis individually, right? You're killing it with interpersonal thing. You've got the relationships down. You can talk to your boss appropriately and your fellow housemates appropriately, and all that's working really well. But you have this never-ending nag that you're just a failure and never going to be good enough. Cool. We can shift the whole therapeutic plan towards that area and really focus on it with that particular student. And then on the back end, we can also create groups that can help everybody, because I'm sure if one person's feeling it, other people are feeling it too. And then we could talk about how that breaks down into specifics and things that we do that are more dynamic than in your traditional model. And I think Lauryn has some really good examples of what that looks like.
There's some huge bonuses to being able to work with the girls in such a consolidated setting where I get to see them in all aspects of their life and how they handle different situations and different scenarios. Sometimes we'll end up planning a group and do something like art therapy. We did some splatter painting previously, and it did not go as planned, and that was okay. We were able to, on the back end of that, come together with the student, myself, and a mentor, and actually talk about why that happened the way it did, what they were concerned about, what the emotions were behind that, and what they wanted to get out of moving forward, having been able to process the things that they were concerned about.
You also took a bunch of students to an escape room, right? What was that like?
That was a ton of fun. I love seeing them all outside of their element in a situation and scenario where they had to work together to achieve a common goal. We got to see that they have an ability to work on a deadline and that they have this ability to encourage and motivate each other if they want to. They also have the ability to get really frustrated and leave the escape room if that's how they chose to handle it. And then we got to come back and each one of us processed differently, separately, what their emotions were, what their feelings were surrounding the group activity. Would they want to do it again? Yes or no, and why? And then that student that decided that they wanted to leave because they were angry because they were trying to monopolize the entire situation and move forward with every single piece without the rest of the group, they didn't get to complete. So now we get to go back and we get to have that conversation in our individual session about why that happened, what that student's feelings were surrounding that situation and scenario, and why they left, and what they kind of hope to gain from, in a sense, repairing some of these relationships in the future.
And all that translates to real life skills that you can use outside of an escape room?
100%.
I guess that's the experiential part of being able to bring that back and the importance of the teachable moments that come about from those experiences.
Yeah, and that's been Integrated's philosophy since our doors opened. Everything is a teaching moment. Everything is therapeutic, right? When we think about therapy, an hour a week in a room with a therapist, that is beneficial and it has its place. And as a licensed therapist, I'm all about that hour. As somebody who manages the clinical oversight of our program, it's important to recognize that every moment that a student is working with a mentor, they are learning something. Even if what they're learning is the way that they treat people is not going to get them what they want, right? And we capitalize on those learning moments so that we can combine them with this experience, like going to the escape room and then tying all of that back in so that when that student gets their first job and they get frustrated and they quit and they come home, yeah, that reminds me of the time that we went through the escape room. What did we learn there? What can we take away from that? How do we connect it to what we just learned at work so we can go out and get the next job and try harder, try differently, do something specific so that we can hopefully maintain that employment and see where it goes next.
How does spiral dynamics play into this process?
Spiral dynamics, just like in our more traditional transitional model, is utilized as the backbone of everything that we do within this residential level of care. So we utilize spiral dynamics to help us to understand where a student is in their level of development. And we use it as common language so that all of us at this table can understand, okay, this is where a student is at. Here's what's holding them back from the next level of development. And here's what we're going to do to get them there. And it's an awesome tool to help us to be able to communicate effectively, to communicate with students effectively, and then to communicate with stakeholders and parents effectively so that everybody understands this is where your student is at. Here's what we're trying to get to.
And then everyone starts to learn this language. It becomes really a common language that everyone shares, which is, I think, really neat in that respect. Because sometimes there are, certain therapeutic terms, I guess a lingo you could say that maybe people aren't familiar with, but what it does, it takes it all so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, if you have a student in integrated interventions, understanding spiral dynamics and our phases of development and our lines and levels of functioning goes a long way to understanding the language that we use to describe where your student is at, how we're targeting those areas that we're going to work on and strive to perfect or get better, and then relay that back to parents so that they understand where their student is struggling.
Do you feel like it also helps them understand the world at large in a better context?
Yeah, so the cool thing about spiral dynamics is it can be used to measure success and growth and functioning levels of societies, of continents, of cities, of countries, or of people. And so if I can help somebody to understand the phases of development through Don Beck's spiral dynamics, then that student can utilize that understanding to assess their own place in the world as they move through life, but also the communities that they're in.
What is your favorite part about something that challenges the notions of traditional levels of care?
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time in residential models. I thought that my heart was always going to be in adolescence, 11 to 18. And what I learned is that I would work really hard with the student to get them to a place where they felt comfortable and confident in what I had taught them. They go home, they lose that rigid structure and support of the program, and they fall flat on their face. And there was a lot of years where I was like, there has to be more to this. There has to be a next level of care. Integrated interventions created that level of care in our transitional program that helps students to get from the residential model into the world. Well, now we're starting to work backwards and create this residential level of care that provides the opportunity for students to both have the rigid structure and support that they need to be grounded and have the ability to grow today, and move towards that transitional level of care tomorrow so that as they move through the program, they get closer and closer to that goal of sustainable independent living in a way that's really organic and matches what the real life is going to look like and is different than any other program I see out there.
As someone who has worked in residential levels of care before, and hospitals and things of that nature, they have the ability to backslide and utilize us for safety reasons and for concerns that they've had in the past or behaviors that they've had in the past. But they also have this ability. We don't have a giant wall around the house saying you can never enter society again, or you're restricted to exactly this area with exactly people who are in a like situation. We have the ability to say, okay, you want to go out into the community and you want to interact with people. And that's something that you're going to do when you go home. So let's go ahead and let's come alongside you and let's do that with you and let's see what that looks like. And then let's talk about it. If you had an interaction, you didn't like it. Okay, well, what didn't you like about it? How would you like that to go? We see plenty of situations and scenarios where our students come in and they don't know how to cook a meal for themselves because they've always stood in a line with their tray, walked up, gotten food, and then left. And then they come to us and they don't know how to boil water. So sending somebody from a situation where they had everything done for them, they've been told and directed exactly where they're going to go at exactly what time of the day, and sending them back to their old bedroom, their brain can't handle that. Wait, what am I supposed to be doing? I remember at this time, 9 o'clock at the residential treatment program that I was previously a part of, they would be calling me for meds. What time is it? I slept in. Now I can't take my meds at 9 o'clock. I don't know what I'm doing. And then the entire day spirals out of control after that because they don't have that structure and rigidity that they're used to. In this model, we're able to provide them the option. Okay, we can prompt you. We can give you some feedback and guidance. But if that's something that you decide not to do, that's how the real world is. Now you have to decide where that leaves you ultimately. So this is a really cool opportunity to be able to foster independence and growth and encourage them to move forward in whatever direction they're trying to go, and to be able to take that away with them so they don't have to stay in a program for the rest of their lives, and they don't have to be constantly readmitted. We see that a lot. This is a wonderful opportunity that I'm so happy to be a part of because it gives us this opportunity for them to not have to come back.
We've always said, this is something a lot of people talk about, we want this to be their last program when they come to us. And it really gives them a really great shot at that. Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining the Integrated Interventions podcast. Thank you, Joshua and Lauryn, once again. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to www.integratedinterventionsllc.com. Also, like and subscribe on YouTube. Visit us on all of our areas that we have on social media. I've been your host, Patrick Dundas, Director of Education, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.